Okay, good afternoon everyone. Apologies for the slightly late start, but we're still getting some of you in the room, and I think there could be a few more school students coming in as we go along. But you're very welcome here today to the Scottish Parliament and to the Festival of Politics. I'm Douglas Ross, I'm an MSP. I cover the region of the Highlands and Islands up in the north of Scotland, but I'm also the convener of the Education, Children and Young People Committee. Every Wednesday we meet in this room and I'm normally sat up the front and the witnesses are down this end, so it's a slightly different view for me today, but I'm delighted that we have an excellent panel who I'll get to introduce themselves in a moment. And I've been given quite a few questions to get the conversation going, which I will use, but I'm more keen actually to hear from you as well. So if anyone wants to come in at any point, raise your hand and we will go to the audience for questions. So don't be shy. There's no such thing as a stupid question in this building. Indeed, this is such an important issue. I'm keen to hear from as many of you as possible. So maybe starting with Greg, I'll ask the panel to give a short introduction. Greg.
Thanks very much. My name is Greg McDowell. I'm a head teacher of Portobello High School. I've been there for over a year, but this is my third headship. We have recently introduced a phone ban, but I'll go into more detail on that as the discussion continues. I'm in a slight cold sweat because right in front of me are some of my former pupils from my previous school as well. So yeah, excuse me if I'm kind of like trying to double take here. But yeah, I'm interested in hearing some thoughts and happy to share our journey as Portobello High School and the journey we've been on in consultation with our families, our young people and our staff as well.
Beth.
So hello, I'm Beth Mackay and I'm the MSYP for Banffshire and Buchan Coast, and I'm also a representative for the North East of Scotland through UK Youth Parliament, and last year in 2024 I was the representative of Scotland in the UK Parliament's Youth Select Committee. So thank you.
Thank you. Michael.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael Murray. I'm Head of Regulatory Policy at the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO, which is the UK data protection regulator. Part of my job is to lead on policy related to children's privacy, things like age assurance, how children engage with recommender systems, and how companies use data protection by design and default to make sure that the systems that they offer to children are protect children's data and personal information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Matthew.
I'm Matthew Sadlier. I work in Dublin. I work in the Mater Hospital. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm a member of Health Professionals for Safer Screens, which is a group that advocates on this issue. I got very involved with this because obviously I work in an inner city hospital that has an emergency department, and we've seen presentations of self-harm go from about 200 a year in the mid-90s to 4,000 a year at the moment. And we've seen eating disorders go astronomical, and we'll talk about that at some point in time, I'm sure. So that's what we've got involved. I also have an academic commitment to University College Dublin and have done some research in this area.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you'll agree, a very experienced panel and a wide range of views for us to hear from today. Now, I did have a bit in bold that I had to read out, which I didn't, so I will just say this just to cover myself. We do look forward to the discussion and hearing from everyone and their own thoughts and views, and it's important that everyone is given the opportunity to contribute, even where there may be differences of opinion, and we treat each other respectfully at all times. And maybe that's something I'll start including in my pre-brief to my committee members when we come back in a couple of weeks' time. But obviously we're here today to speak about smartphone-free childhood, or the fact that many do not. We know from the statistics that many children aged under 9 have their own smartphone, and is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? And that's kind of the debate we're going to have over the next hour or so. But I suppose just to kick things off and start thinking about your questions, we do have microphones, so if anyone's got a question, catch my eye and we'll get to you straight away. But where are we with smartphones for this current generation? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Are they spending too much time on their screen? Are they using them for good purposes, or is it distracting them? Maybe Greg from their education, and Greg and I were discussing earlier the policy that his new school at Portobello have introduced, where students have their mobile phones taken away during the school day. So maybe Greg, speak a bit about prior to that introduction, how it affected education, and how it's changed since you introduced that policy.
Yeah, no problem. I suppose it's worth saying that many schools across Scotland and the country have very similar approaches to mobile phones. And the vast majority of classrooms across the country, young people in general, are not on phones. So every school out there is trying to do something that's right for their school, right for their community as well. But with that, you see a lot of variation. And certainly that came to light when we began to explore as a school how we take the next steps in our journey and how we manage mobile phones. And the big shift in my experience, and I'm around 20 years in the profession, was the TikTok generation. Things like social media, of Snapchat, messaging, we could manage that. I felt I could manage that. As a classroom teacher, I felt I could manage that as best I could. Things like the other things like TikTok and WhatsApp groups now that young people are part of was just so addictive. And having taught in the classroom, I still teach now. I certainly saw a difference between when I was there teaching full-time in the classroom and then obviously still teaching maths as well more recently. And the difference was that there was a level of distraction that you could no longer manage, was my opinion on it. So when we set out as a school, one of our key aims was to make our classrooms distraction-free. And that is why, as a school community, through our 9-month journey with parents, our carers, young people, staff, that we made sure whatever we introduced, it was to reduce the level of distraction in the class. And what it was ultimately was taking the responsibility away from the child, because they're too young to be able to manage effectively. And I'm talking about 11 to 18, to manage effectively how they engage with lessons and also manage a device that is hugely addictive if they've got those apps that I mentioned on as well. So we've opted for a phone pouch approach. Young people enter our school in the morning, they place the phone in the pouch, it gets locked with a magnet, locking system, and it's gone for the day. They keep it in their bag and we don't see it. And when I say we don't see it, we literally, I've just been looking today, before I arrived today, I was looking at the 1,600 young people moving, didn't see a single phone. And that was at an interval in time when you would expect to see young people on phones in many schools across the country. And the difference, I will say, and I don't use this, it's been transformational. I asked all of my staff, over 100 teachers back in June, after only 6 weeks of implementation, what difference has it made? And over 100 teachers, there was not one single negative view around it. So for a teacher in the classroom, I think it's protecting learning. I think ultimately it's what we've managed to do. We've managed to protect the learning environment so that young people can focus on what's right there as well. And that's where we are at the moment. And I'm happy to answer any questions around about that. No doubt other schools will adopt a similar policy. Queensferry High School have something similar now. And others will no doubt follow as well as we go forward. But we took the idea from what's going on in the States, other schools as well around internationally that are doing something similar. Down south as well, we looked at that. And for us, it was a no-brainer when it came to sit down and look at it. Okay.
There's clearly, based on the uniforms, a number of current students in the audience. Those who are currently at secondary school, do your schools, if you can raise your hands, have a policy like this? Is anyone? So all of the students in here at the moment are at schools where you're allowed your mobile phones. That'll be interesting maybe as we have more of a discussion. Beth, I explained obviously being convener of the Education Committee. One of the things I was keen on was to hear from young people. So we introduced a dedicated session for MSYPs to come along and give evidence to the Education Committee. And one of the areas we looked at was mobile phone use in schools. And I think it's fair to say that there were some mixed views, but on the whole, I think the MSYPs were keen to keep their phones, and there's a number of reasons, and I know Greg could go into some of the exemptions that there are that allow people to keep phones for health reasons or caring purposes. But could you give us an update on where the members of the Scottish Youth Parliament are on this issue at the moment?
So we have when it comes to mobile use in general, we have a resource which we've collaborated with the members of the Children's Parliament and through Scottish Government, and it's called Mind Your Time, and it's a resource that then helps establish young people to understand how to develop healthy online habits and how not to have an excessive screen time. I think when it comes to mobile phones in education, when I've had discussions with other MSYPs, when we're in a lot of, I'm going to start that sentence again, sorry. A lot of digital spaces include education now, and if I talk about my own high school experience, we relied on our phones a lot through classes, and obviously where mobile phones are not used, there probably are other digital spaces provided, whereas our school couldn't provide that. And so I think when we're talking about where, if it comes to an outright ban, we have to make sure the fact that there isn't exclusion based on where you are and what you can do. And if it's then you're using paper resources or there's more online spaces but you're doing it together as a class, that's the solution. But we cannot rely on individual schools just for an outright ban altogether. I think that's a pretty fair conclusion to take.
Yeah. And I think that's reflective of what we heard from your colleagues earlier on this year. Matthew, understandably from the first two panellists, we've heard a lot about phones in schools, but the reason students have phones is because they've had them for a long time, potentially before they get to secondary school. This is one of the things we're looking at, is the age that some youngsters start to have their first mobile phone, and then almost it becomes an addiction to use that. I know I'm guilty of it. All the MSPs in here are on their phones a lot of the time when we should be concentrating on important issues. But where are we in terms of the age that young people start to use these mobile phones and the impact that has, and what you're seeing with some of the case studies that you see?
Oh, well, I mean, so the average age of getting a mobile phone or a smartphone, and I think it's fairly similar in Ireland and the UK, and in fairness, you know, we're very similar demographics, will be somewhere in the region of 8 or 9. Okay, it's about a quarter, by about 4 years of age, have a smartphone of some description. Now, how much they can use it at 4 years of age is an interesting question. And then by about 8 or 9. So most people will have one before 13 at some point in time. Now, the issue is owning the phone and what you do with the phone. And the problem is there's a lot of research in these areas, and a lot of research conflates lots of different things to do with screens, whether it's, you know, television watched communally, television watched individually, individual immersive use of a screen on a phone, immersed into something that has a generative algorithm and something that is designed to be, you know, that is designed to maximize your time spent on the platform, you know, which taps into, like all addictions and abuse, you know, whether it's substance abuse or whether it's a behavioral abuse, you know, they tap into normal physiological processes that we are born with, that is evolved with humanity. And what we call, there's a term which is a supernormal response. So we have a reward pathway, which is our mesolimbic pathway from our ventral striatum, which is kind of, if you take my two fingers kind of there, up to your nucleus accumbens, which is slightly anterior to it. And that is the so-called dopamine pathway. Now, there's lots of other neurochemicals involved, beta endorphin specifically, good work being done at the moment, and kind of your endogenous opiate systems. But essentially what is happening is this reward pathway is being hijacked by the reward stimulus that you get from being on a phone. And I say to people that social media specifically is very similar to gambling. But instead of gambling with money, you're gambling with reputation. And we as human beings are hardwired in to have a reputation centre, to be seen what our community thinks of us. And you put up a photograph on social media in the same way that you bet Celtic are going to beat Hibernian or Hibernian are going to beat Celtic or whoever. And you wait for the end of that match to see whether you've got the reward. You put the picture up, and it's a very similar response. Now, the worst thing that can possibly happen, similar to the gambler, is that you win. You know, you go for the 5-0, 100-to-1 bet, and suddenly your £10 is now £1,000. And then you go again. You put up that photograph on social media, you get to 10,000 likes. You get international likes. Oh my God, somebody in Japan likes me. what do you think is the next response the person's going to do? Is the next photograph, is the next photo. We're turning a generation of adolescents into editors of their own small local newspapers, where they are spending more time wondering about content creation than they are about living and being a person. And I think it is critically that we need to go back that digital technologies are here to stay. There's no doubt about that. They will evolve and change, but they are here to stay. But we need to address them as humans. And we can only do that by giving people the space to learn how to be a good human first.
So that probably leads us on to an interesting area around tech companies and others. Governments are currently looking at more legislation around this area. Michael, from the ICO, what are you looking at with the current situation with access to smartphones and apps and social media usage? And what could that look like in the future with some of the changes governments are considering, both here in the UK and further afield?
Yeah, the data actually shows about 97% of children at the age of 12 have a smartphone, so it is ubiquitous by the time they're getting into Greg's schools. The part of the issue we've got is trying to identify holistic solutions, because a smartphone ban is one particular response. And unfortunately, we don't have the evidence yet to show that that's a sufficiently robust response, or if that alone will do the job, and it probably won't. Some research in University of Birmingham recently showed that smartphone bans don't have a significant impact on some of the issues that Matthew talked about, because the children who, when they leave school, will be straight on their phones. They'll be using their phones late at night. They'll be going through the same addiction issues. Their data will be processed and fed in a way that ensures that they are constantly getting that dopamine hit. So what we need to do is find how the different responses that governments in Scotland, in the UK, in Ireland and elsewhere have worked together. So if we're doing a ban, and the ICO itself doesn't have a particular policy on that ban, that's something that's the responsibility of government to decide, how does that link to the ICO's plans for recommender systems, for example, or the age-appropriate design code that social media companies should be using to reduce the risk of harms to children. And for us, we, for example, have the power to fine social media companies if they're not following the data protection legislation. Ofcom is doing the same on a content level. So we're trying to deal with it from the perspective of the company that designs the product. In this case, the product is not the phone itself, because that's just an instrument. It could easily be a tablet or a laptop. But it's the services that are the addiction. The phone itself probably is not the addiction. It's the service that the children are using. It's the TikTok, it's the Instagrams, and so on. So our remit is to try to work with companies to reduce the harms that are caused by the processing of children's data in a way that feeds negative content and contributes to the addiction issues that Matthew talked about. Part of our problem also is, again, when you're looking at holistic solutions, it's just banning something or trying to work with companies is only part of the issue. When we're looking, for example, at whether or not parents should consent to this, our research shows that parents typically let the kids do what they want. So when we have a 13 plus age of consent in the UK, our data shows that half of parents will allow children under 13 to access social media services because of pester power, because other children are doing it, or because it's a good form of daycare for them, whatever the reasons are. So there's a whole ecosystem of change that's needed, including digital literacy for parents, digital literacy for teens and children, training for teachers. When we ask teachers, do they do data protection in the classroom, most said yes, but then we asked them, well, do you talk about profiling or geolocation data? And they had no idea what we're talking about. So it needs to be a holistic solution whereby all those elements work together. There's improvements across the board in how all of us recognize the problem, contribute to the solution, and phone bans in schools might be part of that solution, but they're not going to solve the problem without everything else. So what is the problem? Is it trying to keep kids engaged in the classroom, like Greg says there's benefit for, that's probably a social media ban, I'm not sure. But if it's to raise attainment or if it's to prevent addiction, then a ban probably alone is not going to do that job.
Okay. I asked the students in the room a question. So parents in the room or grandparents, kids or grandkids in your family, do they have a mobile phone? Hands up. Yep. Anyone who has not given their child or know their grandchild, say, under 10, a phone? So quite a few. So is that because there's a concern, or you think it will come eventually and you want to wait as long as possible before your child or grandchild has a phone? Yep, have we got the mic? Yep, so down the front here, the gentleman in the body warmer.
Yes. My granddaughters are 8 3/4. They've never been near a phone. My daughter won't let them. She sees the damage done to their friends, to others who are aged to similar ages, who spend all their time on phones, they don't read. And I read recently this week that 6-year-olds are watching pornography. This just cannot be right. And hence my daughter is adamant. She's a part of the organisation Smartphone Free Childhood, where they've made a pact where children up to, I think, 14 will not have access to smartphones. I've spoken to children, sorry to make a speech, I've spoken to children who are much older at university. I said, do you think it was wrong that you as a child were able to have smartphones? And virtually unanimously they say yes. So my question to the panel is going to be, look, this is a no-brainer. Greg said that. What are you going to do, especially the Parliament? Because waiting for the tech companies to do something just isn't going to happen. We're going to be here in 10 years' time still talking about it. You've got to take action, and Douglas, perhaps you'll outline what your plans are, because sitting around doing nothing isn't going to work.
Yeah. There were a couple other hands. Anyone else want? Yes, the lady here.
Full disclosure, I'm one of the parents that Greg mentioned in the sort of Portobello High development of that innovation there. And my eldest is right at that tipping point. He's 11 going on 12. He is in the minority, if not anomalous, in not having a phone. And, he's aware of it, but he knows, and I'm part of the Smartphone Free Childhood movement as well. And as I say, we've been with a couple of other parents working to try and raise awareness in our own primaries and elsewhere. And we're also trying at the moment to get some of the primaries together, to work together, to make change in, as you say, not just thinking about bans, but thinking beyond and thinking about what happens elsewhere, what happens at home, educating parents, making people aware. But I had a very similar question that I wanted to ask, and it was to you, is what is happening? Is it enough? Where is the legislation at? I know there have been debates in committees and proposals have been brought, but it doesn't seem as though much is happening. There's a lot of hesitation before this very necessary step that is needed.
Okay, so maybe just to address that, this is an issue that gets brought up quite a lot in Parliament and at committee, in fairness. I can't speak on behalf of the government. I'm an opposition politician, but when this point is put to the current Cabinet Secretary, Jenny Goruth, she's very clear that there are local, it's devolved, education's devolved to local authorities, and local authorities can implement their own bans in schools, as we've seen at Portobello. My own local authority, Murray Council, passed a similar ruling at the tail end of the last educational year, before the summer holidays, and yesterday when school pupils went back for the first time, they had to put their phone away going into school. So it'll be I think we're at the learning stage in terms of that issue within schools, but I think what you're getting at is this wider issue of the access of phones at an earlier age. Of course, it's parental choice, the vast majority of parents, as we've heard, if 97% of 9-year-olds and above... by 12. If 97% of 12-year-olds and above have a mobile phone, that is the overwhelming massive majority of parents are providing them with that phone. So maybe it's more education about the risks. I know as a parent there are massive risks. My boys are 6 and 4, we'll come to the lady in the front in a moment, and they use our mobile phones, not for any other purpose than they normally steal them, and I come back and I've got 500 pictures of, an implement in my kitchen. But my boys know how to grab the phone and to start taking pictures. So the age at which we start to, expose our children to these phones is getting younger, and the responsibility is on the parent. And I know it's because I've always got my phone on, it's in the living room, it's buzzing the whole time, that my sons will probably think that's an acceptable thing when they come to an age to start asking me for a mobile phone. So I think there's a bit we have to do on parental responsibility, a bit we have to do at how examples such as Portobello are working, and I think you're a few months into it now. It'll be interesting to see in the next couple of years, does that make a difference with attainment compared to other schools that don't take a similar approach? And it may be that as analysis of the schools or the local authorities that do that, it may be that governments in the future decide to take a more national approach to this. And of course, we're in the lead up to an election. And as a group, you're organised. I'm sure you'll be contacting parties about manifestos, what they may put into manifestos in the coming election, because that's an important point. If you can get that into a party's manifesto, they then have legitimacy if they then win that election to take things through Parliament. But at the moment, I think the government are having a fairly hands-off approach, saying the autonomy lies with the head teacher or the local authorities to do a bit more. But it's certainly an evolving issue. And I think if we had this discussion at the tail end of last Parliament, you'd have had a very different response to the one that you're getting at the tail end of this Parliament, because it is a growing issue and it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue. The lady in the front here, and then we'll get back to some of the panels.
Thank you. I've been writing books about child development in the modern world for the last 25 years, so I've been rather aware of this on its way up. And I'm very, very impressed by Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, which I think has one of the best sound bites I've come across. And we've moved from a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood. And that word play is actually, to anyone interested in child development, very important. And I think what we're talking about and what seems to be coming across is what we actually need is culture change, because its parents are not aware. And having had a long time to think about this with a lot of other people from education, we set up a campaign in Scotland for a kindergarten stage similar to Upstart Scotland, similar to the ones in Nordic countries, which would go from the ages of 3 to 7. It would be a complete change in terms of universal state services in a way, because I think you'd be moving the emphasis from education 3 to 7 to public health. And emphasising socio-emotional, physical, every sort of development, turning out human beings and making it phone-free during that period. I think you've got to take some sort of serious universal state services approach, because otherwise you don't get a culture change and you're not going to move things with parents. Thank you.
Matthew, you were nodding a lot when you heard that quote.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan Haidt's book, it's not perfect, but it's very good. I don't know if I'd be letting my child go off in the subway at 12 years of age or whatever it was at the end of it. But I think there's 2 or 3 things I think are really critical to understand, in my opinion, on this issue. First of all is adolescence and childhood is a transitory phase. So with respect to the young people in the audience, you won't be young for very long. So it is the next group of young people. So just because the current group of 12-year-olds have a mobile phone doesn't mean the next group of 12-year-olds have to have a mobile phone. I grew up in a country, and I'm sure most people over the age of 40 did, so the first time I came to Edinburgh, I flew over in an airplane where there was a smoking section in the actual airplane. Now, to the younger person, that probably sounds bonkers. It was, but there was smoking seats at the back of the airplane. So we've been here before. We've been here with cigarettes. We've been here. I remember when seatbelts were introduced in cars and people had this is going to be the worst thing. How can I drive with a seatbelt? We're going to have crashes everywhere because I'd be constrained. But it does take a societal change. It takes changing the paradigm. It takes changing the paradigm for parents to go, actually, you know what, giving a child trying to learn how to speak off a YouTube video is a child in a digital, institutionalized environment where they are learning to speak to YouTube. They're not learning to speak to a person. You know, and the only other thing I'll come in while I have the microphone for a brief second is that University of Birmingham study. Like, the methodology in that study was very, very mixed. And what they were looking for that was a level of evidence to prove that this was not effective that is beyond what most medical standards are. They were looking beyond, you know, beyond reasonable doubt rather than balance of probabilities. But what that study did show, and that study is very powerful, is that the longer the students spent on a mobile phone, the worse was their educational attainment, the worse was their mental health, and their worse was their functionality. Yes, that's time they spent outside of school rather than inside of school, but it's critically important that that was shown. So that study really said bans and phones, bans of schools and phones, which it's just bonkers that there wouldn't be one. Like, I wouldn't have been allowed to go into school with a copy of the Beano. Like, I wouldn't have been allowed, and you wouldn't allow somebody in the middle of a classroom to take up a copy of a newspaper and just start reading it. But it is weird how mobile phones have infected us, that you can be in a conversation with somebody and they will go, oh yeah, 1 second here. Yeah, no, I'm listening. Like, you wouldn't pick up a newspaper and say, I'm just reading this article here for a second while you're talking, go on. You know, so I do think that study showed important things, which is we have to go further. I've totally forgotten what I was saying at the start of my train of thought. And I'll just say, yeah, I agree.
I should have said Matthew had previously appeared in the Fringe Comedy Festival, and I think we're seeing a bit of it through very important information he's giving us, but you're still getting some laughs in Edinburgh, so well done for that.
More than I did when I was
We were going to have a video at the start of today's session that some of the MSYPs had, were hoping to film and present. We weren't able to do it. Are there some MSYPs in the audience who were involved in that might be able to tell us a bit about what they would have been saying? We can have a discussion about that, because I think, you know, we've heard a lot from parents and teachers, and Beth has given the view of the MSYPs, but if there was any interest to explain, we're still having a confab around about that. Beth, obviously Matthew's point there is you're not going to be young forever. Look more forward than backwards. How do you look at, as MSYPs in a youth parliament, about taking decisions and policy proposals in the here and now that is actually probably not going to affect you but will affect the next generation of MSYPs?
Well, I think that's a very good question. When it comes to the policies that we do make, we are very adamant that change will affect other people differently. For an example of that would be our under 22 bus travel. Now, the debate we've had is that works brilliantly unless there's no bus, and in which case, how much does that affect us? When it comes to mobile phones and how we can create change for future young people, we kind of have to, a lot of the time when we come up with policies, and a lot of the time in general when we come up with new ideas as to how to create future change, it relies strongly on education and local authorities. Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't, but I'm saying the fact that when we talk about, we need to educate people on understanding data profiling, what we really need is a skill set, because we can talk about bans, but we've also kind of had the debate of, realistically, how does that happen? And if there is a phone ban or a social media ban, do we see that as actually protecting young people, or does that make it worse because there's not legislation to protect young people online? And we kind of more need a skill set to be taught for young people and to parents to understand how we can progress, because with the best will in the world, things have changed, as we've said. Social media and online spaces are different when I was 12, and they'll be different in 10 years when the next people are 12. But there isn't necessarily a straightforward answer as to how we can create change now, other than just making sure that young people continue to be in the consultation for it. We have a program that's called the Right Way Project, which is able to then support decision makers supporting young people in legislation and in future work. So it's following that to make sure that future things that do happen, as it will affect young people have to be at the steering wheel of it. So, yeah.
Again, if anyone's got any points they want to raise, just put your hand up at any point. I'll come to the lady there in a moment. But Greg, Matthew's point was the children of today are obviously not the children coming through, and therefore it doesn't necessarily have to be a fait accompli that they will be glued to their mobile phones. But the converse could also be true, that things get even worse. How do you view that as a head teacher? Do you call it a ban, or?
No.
And is it sustainable for the generations coming through? Is this now it at Portobello High School, that no pupils coming in future years, or will you have to look at the situation in 5 or so years when the next generation comes from primary into secondary, and how are you looking at that going forward?
Yeah, I think it's we've kind of spoke at length with parents in a community in Portobello around that. Where are we just now? And if we're honest, we've lost the battle with social media. Yeah, we're on the back foot already. We're 1-0 down, sticking with the football analogy. But AI is just looming there, isn't it? And already I've seen Snapchat had the built-in AI features, and various others have got the AI features built in now as well. And that's just there. It's not. I feel it's a bit of a trickle into secondary schools. I feel that actually some young people are engaging with it. They're using it. But in terms of what they're using it for, I'm not seeing that negativity come right through just yet. But the more the tech firms adapt their apps, etc., they're going to become more addictive. Let's appreciate that. They're not going to become less addictive. So I think we'll again have to review what we do. I suppose ultimately where we want to get to as a community is we have a digital technology charter, something along those lines, or an ethical technology charter that recognises not only what we do in school, because I don't like this mobile phones in schools. It's just mobile phones per se. It's just not about what schools do. But I think we have to look beyond the school, what happens in our nurseries, primaries, where our parents are at with it, where our young people are using technology. And I think Beth makes a really, really valuable point. We have no consistency from local authority to local authority across Scotland. I've got the benefit of working with the Inspectorate. I get to travel and see other schools. It's hugely varied across the country. In Edinburgh Council, if your child's here, you're given an iPad that is locked down. You can use it effectively. If you travel to another local authority, 10 Mile, it's a completely different policy. So that's why we see such variation in how local authorities and schools and head teachers are having to respond to this, because sometimes you don't have the infrastructure in place to be able to introduce like a ban or restriction on phones.
But then do you think you should or you shouldn't have the choice? Should it be myself and my colleagues here in Parliament dictating what happens in local authorities and in every school, or should you as the head teacher with your senior leadership team and parents be able to come up with your own policy?
I think where we are right now is it would be impossible for some schools to introduce something similar to what we have in Portobello, because we have to train young people, educate young people in digital technology. They have to be using digital technology. We accept that. In some schools, they use the phone as a digital tool for learning, and I've been there, I've done that. However, it's very, very difficult to manage because there's often no restriction on other things they could be looking at. I think I'm in a very good position now, whereby our young people have access to an iPad that's provided for them, and all the infrastructure that's required, and tech support and all the rest of it. And what they can download is very restricted as well. And that allows me then to say, well, actually, we don't recognise the phone anymore as an effective learning device. So that gets put in the bag, and we have the iPad, for example. And you see that. There's different local authorities, different approaches to it. But I think we have to get to a place where, as a head teacher, you're able to do whatever it is you feel necessary in order to ensure that your learning is protected. And that's our core business, remember, in schools. Our core business is learning. It's not managing phones and managing devices that have been provided by parents. Because whilst you're at home and you manage your own child's device, try doing that with 33 young people in a classroom. Yeah? Often the young people that will be missed are the ones that are from the most under-resourced backgrounds, the ones that are more vulnerable online. Young people with neurodiversity, autism, they're much more vulnerable online than a lot of other young people. And we have to recognise that and put things in place that are just preventative measures to ensure the learning can continue as well. And they're given, and it makes it fair, okay, and they all have that opportunity.
The lady at the back there.
Thanks, yeah, it's music to my ears. I come at the issue as a parent. I've got twin 9-year-old girls, and of the list of things that kind of make me anxious or worried about them growing up and my responsibility to grow humans, not just kind of products that can interact digitally, smartphones actually come quite low down, and that's because I feel hugely empowered that no one else is going to buy my child a smartphone and give it to them. It's a decision that I can take. I don't need to give it to them. I find that hugely reassuring, and I feel very empowered by that. And so as we think about culture change, I absolutely take your point. I think parents need to be educated. If it seems to me that if parents see the issues, see the evidence laid out before them, the vast majority will actually start to change. I think we're seeing that. The parents of children in younger years are much more sceptical and cautious about digitally exposing their children to kind of the online world. But then I think we've all got a responsibility, whether it be as a legislator or as a head teacher or involved in tech companies. We've all got to take probably the most cautious approach that we can in terms of introducing our children to online situations. My slight frustration with my primary school is that actually the main reason my children are asking to go online or to do things online is because the school are doing things online. So they're watching YouTube at school more than they are at home. They're playing games online on tablets more at school than they are at home. And so rather than the school equipping them from a world out there, I feel like they're actually introducing them to that world. And what I'm particularly interested in, and sorry to go back to the Portobello example, because I know you've shared a lot, but I'm interested in why you took such a strong approach when the head teachers that I've spoken to locally have said, but the council says we don't need to ban. But the Scottish Government says we don't need to ban. And so that buck is kind of passed on. So I'm really interested to know what made you and your senior leadership team make such a strong decision, which I'm sure did receive some criticism and some backlash from parents from different groups. What was it that made you feel that we had a responsibility to do, to take the decision that you have? And maybe what could we do as parent groups to try to encourage head teachers to take a similar strong position? Thanks.
I'll come to Greg in a moment, just while you've got the mic. If you don't mind saying, and if it's personal, don't say, but is your view that your girls won't get a mobile phone until they are old enough to buy it themselves? Or will there be peer pressure eventually that you think you've just got to get them one?
I'm really cautious about saying I'll do this in the future. I tend to believe parents who've already done it. So at the moment, we've not given them one. We've signed the parent pacts from Smartphone Free Childhood. We don't intend to until they're at least 14. Yeah. I think on balance, as with everything else we give them, we've tended to ask the question, is this going to promote healthy development and growth into good humans and develop their character, or is it not? So if, on balance that becomes yes, then no. At some point in the future we may well, but at the moment it's not even remotely on our radar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. Greg, potentially some of the problems you face, some opposition, and why take this fairly strict approach when the message from on high is it might be good, but certainly we are not going to enforce it at a government level and in some local authority levels?
Yeah, it's a good question. I want you to bear in mind that I work in a state school. It's a fully comprehensive school. We've got young people from all various backgrounds and walks of life, and I think we have to look at my school population and how we protect the learning for the entire school population. And did we have some backlash around it? I'm going to say very little. Okay, did we have some backlash from young people? Very little. And what was the most refreshing thing, and one we can celebrate with young people nowadays, is that when we introduced that restriction, I only had in that entire day 6 young people who were finding it challenging to remove themselves. So we talk about young people being addicted, and we talk about young people not complying, and there's a whole narrative around that. But I think, and from hearing some of the young people and speaking with them, they were actually quite relieved in a way that no longer did they have to walk into a classroom and try and maintain that contact. And if you've ever taught 33 children in front of you, and some of you are teachers here, recognise a couple of faces. Try teaching young people when they're still connected Physically, they're not. But I'd have young people with alerts set on their phones. They knew when their friend went to the toilet because it would vibrate in a particular way. And no surprise, they would then meet in the toilet. And why are we dealing with in-school truancy? Because the kids were connected. They didn't have to type anything. They just could feel from the vibration who it was. They're way beyond where you think they are. So if you think of how you use your phone, a lot of them don't use it that way. They're so far advanced with it. And they're showing me features that I didn't even know existed. So for us as a school, I wanted to tackle some big issues around in-school truancy. I wanted to raise the attainment of the school. I wanted to give young people a chance. And the only way we could think about doing it was by making our classroom distraction-free. We didn't want to have the constant battle of removing phones from children every period and then giving them it back. So in the corridors, they'd wander around with their phone, break times, lunch times on their phone constantly. A lot of young people can cope with that. And no doubt the young people in this room right now, I imagine you can cope with that okay. But a lot of young people can't. And that's where we have to look at the comprehensive approach and say, actually, we have to protect every group within our school. And that's what we sold on with the parents. And thanks to Hilary, who's spoken earlier on, she was one of the core parent group that we worked with intensively to get to where we are now. But you have to see it for yourself. You have to go into the classroom and just look at the challenge that our teachers are facing just now. And we've wanted to give our teachers that opportunity to go and teach and do it rather than having to manage distractions, mobile phones, social media, etc. Hope that answers your question.
Yep. Gentleman here.
Okay, so I'm part of Edinburgh Youth Action, and one of our main kind of issues that we're talking about just now is iPads and phones in schools. And we totally agree, like, there is too much use of phones in schools. But one of the things you were saying was that you kind of have comfort in the fact that students can use iPads and they've got kind of restricted access. But one of our main problems that we've kind of been speaking about is the fact that the iPads can be so heavily restricted to the point where we cannot access anything. I mean, if you go on school iPads that even I use as someone who's in school still, you can't access any images. The majority of websites are blocked. And it gets to the point where I'm like, if I can't use this iPad, I have no, and like what's been said about a lot of lessons have become digitalized. But another problem is that it's kind of counterproductive because so much is restricted on the iPad, you almost feel forced to use your phone. And at my school, phones, there isn't like a phone ban. And I think it's sometimes useful that I can still use my phone because the iPads are so restricted, whereas phones, you know, we can still access things that our teachers are wanting us to access. So I think there's another problem with the kind of alternative options that are being explored right now.
And that's a lot of investment that the council here, you know, who don't have a huge amount of money, have spent a chunk of that dedicated to education on these iPads. And you, as a young person experiencing, are saying that's not working. Is it almost worthless because you can't access the things you need to?
Completely. It's completely worthless, and it's making us want to use our phones more.
Yeah. Okay. Greg, a response to that?
Yeah, I think you've put that so well, and it is a challenge we face as well. And what we have is that sometimes restrictions are the same for an 11-year-old as they are for 17, 18-year-old as well. And that's one of the challenges that we have, to get to a place where we can provide young people who are looking at themes for advanced higher English essays and drama, things that the filters would pick up and prevent you from looking at, particularly images, etc. as well. So please be rest assured that we are working with our community as well around that to see what we need to do to perhaps relax some of those heavy filters you described in some areas as well, to ensure that the educational experience isn't restricted in the way it should be.
Matthew, from the work you've done, what would be the difference if we remove a lot of these restrictions to allow the students to use their local authority provided iPads in the way that would help them, to them just having their own mobile phone? Is it the same issues? Would you be as worried having an iPad as you are with a smartphone?
No, they're all a disaster.
Yeah.
That's and especially for education. Like, people, if you learn something off digital, so humans, we have, because of our civilization, education systems and evolution, we are a super species. We have, because of rote learning in schools, because of doing your times tables, because of forcing you to learn the list of monarchs, we have hypertrophied our hippocampi beyond where it naturally should be. Very good research done on this with London taxi drivers and the knowledge. Okay? We have now got a generation of children who are scoring lower in IQ tests than previous generations because of a concept called cognitive offloading. Our brains are core lazy. If they think this information is on the iPad, your brain will think, I don't need to learn this. If you do an essay and you look up digital information for that essay, you will think you know it. And this is where it is really weird, because your brain will say, I know it because it's stored here and I can access it on my phone anytime I want. So I know that's there. Human beings, if I can just be a bit philosophical for a moment, we have two competitive advantages of other species on the planet. Maybe there's other planets, I don't know. And they are symbolic communication. Okay, we can talk to each other. I can talk to you. I can describe to you where I live. I doubt you've ever seen my house, but you have probably an understanding and create a mental picture based on words. Okay, and our ability to adapt to technology. Now, anybody here drive a car? Put up your hand. What happens to you if you're driving a car down a very tight lane and you think the passenger side of your car has hit a car on the side? Do you physically feel like you've been struck? Do you get an instinctive shudder? That is because human beings, we adapt to the technology we use. Your proprioception has now, when you're in your car, your proprioception sets the limit of your body not here, but 3 foot, sorry, television, 3 foot over here. And what's happening with phones is they're getting into your cognitive systems. They're getting into your hippocampi. They're restricting your ability to learn. They're restricting your ability to understand. If you get somebody and you give them Google Maps and you say, I want you to go from this building here to Murrayfield, right? Like the 2 places in Edinburgh I know. Right? And you do that by Google Maps, or we do that by a map, or I do that by asking people on the side of the street. And then we say, okay, you're in Murrayfield, we're taking the map off you, we're taking the phone off you, we're taking everything. Try to get back to where you are. Which of those 3 people will get back to where they started? The person who didn't use Google, because the person with Google Maps doesn't internalize that journey at all. So we have to be very careful what we're doing in education in regards to digital communication. I'm involved in 3rd level education, and our core principle is limiting our students' access. Because we want to teach them the medical curriculum. We don't want them looking up a million different research papers of something that was discovered yesterday. We're like, you have to know the core knowledge first. When you've got that, at a certain point, yeah, you can go off and go on to your minor stuff, but you must know that core. Because if you don't know that core, if you don't internalize that core, you'll never develop the mental schemata to be able to develop to the next step. So it really worries me at my core to understand that people are using these technologies at this young age. And I think neuroscience really needs to be brought into educational theory a lot more than it is.
Okay. Had a lot of questions from this side. Happy to have more from this side. This side, if there's anyone over here, just catch my eye for questions from the floor. An issue that we've started to discuss, and Greg mentioned it, was AI. Michael, in terms of some of the policies around data protection and AI coming more into both education, but just people being able to access AI and using it for good or nefarious purposes, what's the thinking in the ICO at the moment about AI and the potential for it?
The ICO has developed some guidance for services on AI, but in the school context, what's interesting is we're anticipating Westminster requirement for the ICO to devise a EdTech code of practice, or an education and data code of practice, which will probably address some of these issues. We know that the government is interested in AI going into schools to help take the loads off of teachers, which have a difficult job to do, rewarding but difficult job. So how do we do that in a way that's going to protect children, protect the learning, but also support teachers and support children? So that's still to be developed, and I'm sure there'll be lots of opportunity for panelists and audience members to be consulted as we develop that over the next probably 2 years, probably 2 to 3 years before we get there. So I won't go further than that because that's still policy that needs to be developed, and we don't know what the UK government is going to require that code to do yet. So I'll come back in a year or two, Douglas, if you'll have me, and then we'll talk that through about what that means. And I think just going to react a little bit to what Matthew says, and I don't disagree with you, I think, but the whole thing was it's not the device, is it? So you said iPad, iPhone, same thing. It then becomes how people engage with it. The part of the problem, or part of the issue, is that not everybody does it in the same way. We have the young man talking who's really wants to use that device to learn. I've got a daughter who looks up how to get into Cambridge on her phone. That's what she does. She's not looking at porn at 6. What we know is that children who are vulnerable, that Greg mentioned, are more likely to have significant problems than children who are not from middle-class backgrounds. So the audience here is not going to be representative of the entire population. We know that a lot more services are digital. We know that a lot of parents who are disadvantaged don't know how to do that, and they rely on the children who are digitally native to help them. If we take away that opportunity for the children to learn about being a digital native and learn how to operate in that space, what does that mean for those disadvantaged parents? So there's the question here, not that we don't do it, is what's the potential consequences that we don't foresee? And that's one of the things that we're looking at if we're looking at a ban, or if we're looking at doing anything, how does it all fit together? How do we make sure that the consequences aren't negative, so that the student on an iPad can actually still look at the video that they need? A ban can't just be simple. And there's no simple solution to this, because we can't go back to the days when we were running around the forests when we were kids. Parents won't allow that. Parents want to see where their children are. Parents want to know exactly that location of their child, right? Most of you do. So how do you do that? It's because on your phone. Parents don't want to give back, well, most, not all. I'll come back to you in a second.
Well, just hold on a second. Just so we get a microphone.
So I'll finish off just by saying that there's been a lot of change recently, and I think this is an issue that we've been grappling with for a fairly short period of time. Most of the data that Jonathan talked about was from 2010 onwards, so we're looking at 15 years. But that's so much change in 15 years. It's amazing how much has changed. But the ICO's Children's Code only came into effect in 2020. The Online Safety Act is just coming to effect now. So those 60-year-olds that are looking at porn next year, they shouldn't be able to, unless there should be an age assurance system in place to prevent it. So let's look at all these different elements, how they work together to try to find the solutions to prevent the problems while not sort of preventing the benefits that these services have to society as well, because there's good as well as bad in most of these cases.
Yes.
What I wanted to say is, yes, maybe most people in the UK and the USA, but not in Europe, not in places like Finland and even the Netherlands and Germany and Europe. And if you actually have a culture which values children running about in the forest, and which, if your children don't run about in the forest, you're thought a bit weird, then that will affect the way children get the chance to develop into human beings rather than into children that just, or people that just stick that, head into a machine.
I'd love my daughter to run around the forest as well.
Yeah, well,
it's
culture change can happen, as Matthew said, and it's happened here many, many times.
Interestingly, my 6-year-old runs around in the forest behind our house, but he's looking for Bigfoot, who he'd seen on YouTube. So, he's using his phone to spark his imagination to then go outside.
As long as he's getting proper outdoor play and proper relationships. But
the state he comes back in, he seems to be enjoying it anyway. So.
And you're lucky if you've got forest outside your house as well.
Yeah, we do. Squirrels and everything in it. We've got a number of teachers, I think, teachers in the audience. We heard from the lady at the back about her 2 twin daughters, and they don't have mobile phones at the moment, but part of the problem is a lot of the teaching now is online. Are the teachers happy about that? Do they find that as a useful tool? Is it an issue that's come up more because of during COVID we had to move to online learning and we've stuck with it? Are there any teachers that want to discuss or give their views on that? Yes?
Hello. So I'm primary, and I think it's changed dramatically. I know we talk about change very quickly, but even in the last 5 years, the different things we would use in primaries, so we would have, this is a fun maths game. It will practice your addition and subtraction, and you'll have a wee character, and you can build up points. 6, 7 years ago, kids would have loved that. Now, that's not complex enough, actually. So, schools are then buying systems which will supposedly help them practice all the kind of math sums that they need. But actually, children disengage because, again, the technology's moved on so far that actually that doesn't appeal to them anymore. Why would you want to do that? And things just keep changing so quickly that actually we can't keep up with that. And that's where the problems are. Because it used to be we were looking for tools, that helped learning and support learning, but the tools aren't keeping up with the rest of the technology which children are, at the end of the day, exposed to, and be playing games like Call of Duty, etc. for a 9-year-old, then of course our little math character running along a screen as he does 2 + 2 isn't actually going to fulfil that need for more and that instant gratification. And that in essence is part of the problem. They're now exposed to too much for it to be really a tool for many of the primary aspects.
Any other teachers want to comment on that? No, Matthew, can I come back to a point that you mentioned right in the beginning, and you said we'd probably come back to about issues around eating disorders and such like. I think that's an important topic to get into, and maybe just speak a bit more about that. And is it because people just, they get this on TikTok and videos and they aspire to be like the people they're seeing in these clips? Is that what you were suggesting? Or
You've kind of summarised my point there, and that is the issue. I mean, I suppose I've come into this from the health care perspective, and I think there's a lot of parallels between smoking and driving and social media. So I know in the Parliament here, you're looking to drop the blood alcohol level from 50 to 30.
It's being considered, yeah.
It's being considered.
Yeah.
Okay, so how many lives do you think that's going to save? So there's 260 people in the whole UK who died in 2023 from somebody who was drink driving. Okay, so we're dropping from 50 to 30, which will have a big social change. Of that 260, 7,500 people killed themselves in the UK in the same year that we know of, and suicide reporting, as we know, is a complicated thing, and I won't talk too much about it, but would the social media regulation save more people than changing the blood alcohol regulation? How many ads on the television and on billboards do you do on prevention of eating disorder, prevention of self-harm on social media compared to how many ads on billboards do you have about drink driving? We've gone from a hospital where we would have about one a year. In Ireland, I'm sure it's similar legally. If somebody has very severe anorexia and you have to contemplate the option of feeding somebody against their will, we have to go to the High Court to get a High Court order, which is not unusual in legal structure. We went from doing that about once a year to now doing it 6 times a year. And what is happening is, and I would say it's not that it's creating new problems, but the people who have the problem, who would have fallen into that vulnerability group, are becoming more extreme. So if you look at whatever percentage of adolescent girls will have eating difficulties, there's similar problems with adolescent boys, but interestingly, it's got to do with bodybuilding, overeating, steroid use, and a slightly different, it's still an eating disorder construct, but it's slightly different. We are seeing that. We are seeing people who get sucked into that, and I don't want to go on too much about it, into the videos around that, around self-harm. And there is an ecosystem about that is very difficult to police. And from your perspective, Michael, I imagine it's very difficult because you go into that world of the beauty influencers. Now, the beauty influencers, in my opinion, are as toxic as Andrew Tate, but just toxic to a different population. And the problem is, one video on how to put on whatever piece of makeup, yeah, that's probably reasonable, but how many people watch one video? You know, and we know that the algorithm, and there's a researcher in Dublin City University who's done good work on this with burner phones, where they kind of put into the algorithm, you know, a beauty video. And how long does it take for you then to get kind of eating disorder content? And I think it was about 25 minutes. Somewhere in that region, if they just let the algorithm on TikTok or YouTube Shorts run. Okay? And that is the concern. And that is one of the big concerns about the health protection. And that is why I do think we need a public health campaign. Okay? I'm speaking here, I'm from a different jurisdiction, but that's why I do think we do need coordination between jurisdictions, specifically on these islands, because I grew up watching BBC and ITV, you know, on the east coast of Ireland, because we put up a very big aerial. And that is not a joke. And I'll tell you a story about that at the end. But we do have a shared media space. You know, we do have a shared media environment. And I think that's critically important that we coordinate our response across these islands. But it is that health effect that is the problem.
And are the worst perpetrators, is it your TikToks and Snapchats, or is it something else? Is it all of the social media platforms?
So for the stuff we're talking about for self-harm, that it is the TikTok and the YouTube Shorts. Now, Snapchat has its own form of danger. And I mean, it should never be forgotten, and apologies for kind of taking over a tiny bit. But like in the United Kingdom, there is a man, Alexander McCartney, sitting in prison in Northern Ireland, who was convicted of manslaughter of a 14-year-old girl in the United States of America, which he did over Snapchat by getting her to send him photographs and then blackmailing her to the point where she ended up taking her own life. So we have somebody committing manslaughter who's never met the person, who did it from 6,000 miles away. And yet, Snapchat rolls on. Now, if he did that to a radio station, a television station, a newspaper, a magazine, what would have happened?
The counter-argument, I'll come to you in a minute, Michael, is you know, young people are using these platforms. They want to use them. No one is forcing them to go on to TikTok or Snapchat. How do we get that balance between ensuring that, you know, young people can use the social media that they want to, but while also being protected?
I think when it comes to the protection, through the Youth Select Committee, part of our recommendations, and I'm going to fill it up in case I quote it wrong, was encouraging social media companies to take responsibility as to what is on their platforms. Because when we talk about social media bans, we talk about things put in place of, okay, they won't be able to recognise that that's a 13-year-old, but young people have always been able to just twist the rules a little bit. And as I said earlier, things when it comes to like a ban or an outright ban, the legislation then doesn't protect the young people. And actually, social media companies won't want young people off of social media because we are a target audience for these beauty influencers and for influencers like Andrew Tate. So when it comes to how to protect young people online, we have to have comprehensive legislation which includes young people, and it relies more on what they can do and how they keep themselves safe, but also how social media companies can protect them as well. So it is the balance, unfortunately, then is me saying there's not an outright solution. It just everyone needs to play their part, and that is how we get a universal solution overall.
And it's one of the issues, because you touched on it earlier, that your youth parliament policies are framed on listening and discussing with young people. The vast majority of people in this building, when it's not the Festival of Politics, are middle-aged or older people like me who are making the legislation. Do younger people need to have more of a say in this legislation?
Absolutely. If it affects young people, and again, like earlier said, I'm not going to be young forever, but respectfully, how long was it until all the people in this building were classed as young people? It's changing all the time, and we need young people to be able to drive what becomes legislation and what that becomes, because only young people right now are able to tell you what the issues are for our peers.
Do you feel the Youth Parliament is heard enough in here on these issues, or what more? Because I know you have good engagement with government ministers as well. You've been to our committee. What more can we be doing in here to make sure your voice is heard on smartphone-free childhoods and other issues?
Sorry, I'm looking at Rosie in case just in case. I think overall, when we've compared models, like a while ago, we spoke to members of the UN to compare how the Youth Parliament model compares overseas. And we do have a very unique model, and we are very fortunate we have been able to work with Parliament and with government. And it is when we're talking about things that are like, oh yeah, young people, that is an issue affecting them. Let's all have a chat about it and let's not include them because they don't know what's best for themselves. I think we are in a very fortunate position where, for the most part, and especially on this national level, in most cases we are included. I think it is just making sure that the discussion is still being had and including young people from across Scotland, and I do mean across all areas, because as I said earlier, experiences of someone in Edinburgh will not be the experiences of a young person in Shetland and surrounding. So,
Well, thank you. Michael, you wanted to come back in?
There's a couple of things. So, I'm really pleased to hear about Beth's views on this one, because the UK is a signatory to UNCRC, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which recognises children have rights as well, and one of those rights is the right to be heard, right to education, right to privacy. So we should be consulting with children widely about their views on all of this, rather than just being we parents are concerned. They need to be part of the solution as well as parents being part of the solution. So I'm really keen that Beth's voice and people like her are listened to. The issues that Matthew was talking about are part of the Online Safety Act. So one of the things, regulators are starting to look at this, but things do take time, and it's regrettable they take time, but all regulators, we need to work through a process. Social media companies are changing. It seems to be slow sometimes, and they're not changing as much as we'd like them to change, but they are changing. And some of the work that the ICO has done has pushed that change. Now that Ofcom's come along and they've got the Online Safety Act, we think the pace of change will increase. So the types of videos that Matthew's talking about should not be allowed on social media under the Online Safety Act. So when I'm talking about be careful of unintended consequences, let's not do anything that prevents the Online Safety Act doing its job. Let's give it a chance to do its job, but then look to see what other things on top of that might be right. And that's where the sort of the literacy campaign to raise awareness of the issues, or to look to see if some of the legislation deals with how things switch. So we're, for example, saying that children shouldn't be shown advertising online regularly, or shouldn't be profiled. But instead, they've got influencers, which are not technically advertising. So do we need to look at that and say influencers are advertising? There's different things that could potentially be looked at, and that's where we need politicians to guide the regulators on what those acts, what that legislation should say. But there's a lot that's been done recently. So I guess it's looking at this, again, holistically. So we're educating the parents. Some of our research shows, again, that parents don't think there's harm online other than when it starts at 18 plus. So porn is a harm. My child being able to get a knife or a gun is a harm. But being on social media, parents don't think is harmful because they use social media to post videos from their holiday or to wish each other happy birthday. And parents don't use social media in the way that a child uses social media, so they don't understand it. So we need to raise that awareness of what the harms are. So government will have a key role to do in raising that awareness, and that the role of parents needs to be an integral part of this. Children need to understand what the harms are. Parents need to understand what the harms are, and the regulators are working on the social media companies and others to make sure that they're designing their systems in a way that protects children. That sort of holistic approach.
I'm going to take Beth back in, and yeah, we've got a question up the back there, and anyone else just raise your hands as we go along. Beth.
So again, I'm bringing up Mind Your Time again, our resource, because again, off the back of parents not quite understanding what young people are doing online. So one of the resources that we have on the site is a top tips for adults, which is written by a bunch of 12-year-olds, and it's great. It's a great list. But the two things I really wanted to bring up from this list is the fact that adults do use social media, they use it in different ways than young people do, and perhaps a solution for adults to feel more comfortable with social media and what young kids are doing is to almost sit with them and see, okay, well, this is the video you're watching, okay, fine, and kind of understanding what the purpose of why they want to be on social media is, as opposed to just assuming the worst. And I think, again, young people in the room, please raise your hand if you have spoken to your mum, or you're trying to, or any carer or parent, and you're scrolling through Facebook as you're talking, and there's no words actually going into what you're saying, and then 10 minutes later you get a question based off of what you just said. Is that like a common experience? Okay, there we go. So it isn't just young people that use social media, adults do too, and sometimes when we're then saying, oh, there are these horrible spaces. There are, I'm not disputing that, but adults also use social media, and it's kind of hypocritical if we are just critiquing young people for being addicted to their phones when actually it is humans as a whole. It's not just people under 25.
I will come to the lady in the back in a second. I want to ask Greg something, but just to speak about hypocrisy. MSPs that are debating this debate it while they're scrolling on their phones. We have a setup in Parliament that we all have a desk, so normally when there's a debate, even if it's about using technology in the classroom, we're on our laptops and such like. So the height of hypocrisy and something that we need to think about. Greg, I just wanted to ask, you were mentioning earlier that it was in-school truancy was one of the issues you were trying to deal with. What was the biggest driver, either from the school or from parents, to introduce your ban? Was it, using this to communicate with fellow pupils, pupil to pupil, and then going off wandering around the school? Or was it because of the worry about TikTok and YouTube videos? What was the one key driver, if there was one above everything else, if you can whittle it down to that? Or can't you?
Yeah, I've got 3 kids myself. What is it you want for your child? And you might not agree, but for me it's to try and keep my children as young as possible for as long as possible and not expose them to the things that we have to deal with as adults on a daily basis. And I think as a school community, when we came together as a group of staff with our parents, that was the ambition. Let's try our best to make the school environment as inclusive, safe and enjoyable as possible. And we felt that the mobile phone access to that and the young people that are in the corridors and staff, and the parents that come in and the visitors, heads down, wandering around. It was there, it was so obvious. And I'm delighted to say that, having just watched it very closely today and over the last since we've introduced it, young people have got the heads up, they're interacting more, they're talking more. Not everybody enjoys it, but I think we're creating an environment where it's giving young people a chance now. There's a reduction in stress with young people. They don't have to be as quick with the text. The only text they're getting in, and sorry young people, I've used the word text, the only messages are from kids in other schools. It's not kids in our school messaging them. Because there's this general, you can't. So let's just enjoy what we've got and take it from there.
We were discussing it earlier, you were suggesting some of the pupils have actually said to you, they might not raise their hands to say we love this ban, but privately they've said actually we are supportive of it.
I think for me, that was the most reassuring thing. And it might surprise you to hear that, particularly in the young people, but the number of young people that I'm having a conversation with just now, I speak to a lot of young people, as you can imagine, but the number of them that are happy, completely satisfied, and actually the odd thanks as well for doing what we're doing and creating that environment. Young people are talking to more young people. Yeah, that might surprise you, but in the school prior to this taking place, there were restrictions on social groups, who you would talk to, who you would. I see young people coming together more. Now, time will tell. How do we now adjust what we do in school? I want to finish on one point, that's a really important point. There's some challenge around about the use of technology. And I would just always to say to you is, remember that school attendance is not what it was. So when I'm planning learning, teaching, assessment, I'm planning for children that are not in the room. Okay, so I teach young people on a virtual setting where they've got the cameras off, because they're so anxious, they can't even put a camera on, they're sitting in their bedroom. What we do in education now is not just for the young people there. We have to get the voice of the young people that don't attend school to the table as well. Because if you remove technology, you actually remove their opportunity and their chance of gaining qualifications and experience as well. So until we get to a place where every young person is absolutely comfortable in a school environment, we can't be taking things away just now. We have to do it in balance. And I think we have to recognise that one of the challenges we have in education right now is emotionally based school non-attendance. It's not, talking to the adults, it's not like it was when you and I were at school. It's a very, very different landscape now with the emotional challenges that young people are facing. Perhaps in part due to the phones and the presence online and the profile online. But we have to recognise that as a challenge right now. And you'll see it around school attendance figures and such like. It's well advertised. Schools are really now trying to boost that attendance rate of young people, but it's a very, very complex challenge. And we rely on mental health services to work together with this one and get it right for the kids.
Okay, thanks very much for your patience at the back there.
So, oh, is this on? Yeah. Just interested in the conversation around smartphone and tech use in schools. So is the argument that the harm is such, like the gentleman on the right, I think, has been saying, the harm caused by inappropriate tech dominance or use in schools is such that it prevents development. So that's why we should control it in the school environment. But then once you get outside the school environment, the harm isn't as much because maybe it doesn't affect your development. Because on the hypocrisy point that was being discussed just before, I do see that, you know, in a working environment, it's like, yeah, you grow up and then the world is full of harmful technology, but maybe it doesn't affect you much because you're older and, you know, you can make your own decisions about it. But I think I can kind of be convinced that, no, you need a tech-controlled environment in schools because that's what's going to help you develop and learn. But then I see that young people go, yeah, but what's the point? Because the world's full of tech, so we're going to have to live in it. And do we need to learn now? But I think that's what the argument is that it's so harmful in the way it's being used in some places that it needs to be restricted for young people. But then, yeah, I'm just saying, I can see that young people go, yeah, but then we're going to have to use it. And that's what the world is. I don't know, it's not really a question, but is that what you'd argue?
I think that is a question. It's certainly in the back of my mind. You know, we can do as much as possible, but once they reach the age that they're out in the big wide world, have we potentially disadvantaged them because they don't have access to other technologies that other young people have had?
No, 100% no. Like, these technologies are so intuitive. Like, I grew up, I'm 50 years of age. Like, I grew up before computerization. I can use a computer. It is not rocket science. So this kind of concept that if you don't learn digital technology in school, you're going to be disadvantaged. No, these things are very quickly, they're intuitively designed, they're easy and able to access. But you should access it from as developed a human brain as you possibly can and use it as a tool to help you. The best analogy is if we got a 3-year-old and we said to this 3-year-old, you're never going to walk more than 10 yards. Every journey over 10 yards will be in a car. How do you think that 3-year-old, when they get to 20, is going to be mobility-wise? We say that what we should be doing is, and that's the analogy I would use, yeah, if I want to go from here to Glasgow, I need to get into a car. Fair enough. But if I want to go here to the corner shop, I should walk. And it's a sort of a similar analogy, that if we over-depend on tech to do every single thing, if we do it all the time in schools, if we're using calculators in primary school, if we're using computers to solve simple problems, you'll never develop the internal mechanisms and the internal structures that as an adult you can come to tech and use tech as a tool to help you, rather than be so dependent on tech that if it takes it away, you then become, you know, not competent in dealing with many life skills. And that is the argument we're coming from. And there is a lot of researchers in Canada who would say, and there's one group particularly who are very scared by the concept of digital dementia, that because young people now are not hypertrophying their hippocampus, because they're not doing the rote learning. That when neurodegeneration hits in, and neurodegeneration is going to hit all of us somewhere about the age, I'm 50 now, so in a couple of years, my brain cells are going to slowly start withering away. Now, if I wither away from a high degree of brain fitness, I'll still be competent, hopefully, into my later years. But if I start withering away from a lower level of brain fitness, because I have so dependent on tech my whole life that I've never hypertrophied any of my internal structures, my grid and play cells, my entorhinal cortex, my parietal lobe has basically been sitting there doing nothing. And I've externalized all those factors. Actually, are we going to hit this construct of a dementia, tsunami, and that people will, at a very early age, start to develop cognitive issues? And this is a real, because we are artificially keeping people's bodies alive much longer through cardiology and cancer treatments and all these sorts of things. And I say artificially, but I mean, it is. And we hope that their brain will still be active as that person gets to 70 and 80. But their brain is active because they've been through this incredible brain training as a young person. And that is, I suppose, the point that I'm trying to make. A little bit philosophical, I know. And if I can just come back into one very quick thing, and I promise I'll stop talking because I know I talk a lot. I think it's not surprising, though, that a lot of your pupils were happy with this. Because if you look at study of school pupils, about somewhere in the region of 30% will say, I don't want to be on technology. And what's really troubling is, like Public Health England did a report on technology, and one of the advantages that they said of children being on technology was avoidance of the fear of missing out. Now, the fear of missing out is coercive control. It is institutionalized coercive control. That when somebody says, I don't want to do this, and they say, well, you have to, okay, well, I'm on tech now, so I do this. It would be like, when I was young, vegetarianism was this sort of weird concept, and you go to restaurants, and most restaurants were like, now, come on. But now we respect people's choice and say, yeah, okay, you have a dietary restriction, that's fine. You want to be vegan, that's fine. Here's your options. But we have to make sure that we do that going forward with technology as well. That if people want to choose not to get digitally involved, that they have that option in the future.
We're at our time. Let's run over a wee bit because we were late in starting, but we'll just take the last couple of comments from the audience and the lady there. Yes, you.
So I'm a parent, but I'm also a child and adolescent psychiatrist, so I've seen a lot of the issues that you've already raised. But I guess I wanted to push back a little bit on this idea of parents, of a lot of this responsibility being on parents, because yes, I do see parents having responsibility, but I also, in the families that I work with, see a lot of parents that are overwhelmed and stressed with a whole load of other things. They're dealing with their own mental health issues. They don't have the emotional reserve to be putting in the kind of boundaries that you're suggesting with their children, because actually a lot of them don't have the parenting skills. And so I think there is a much bigger question around how are we supporting our families so that parents themselves have the resources to be engaging with their children. You talked about parents being on their phones. I'm really concerned about our infants that are not getting the eye contact, that are not getting the speech, that are not getting all of those experiences that are so vital for early development. But we're not going to get that just by telling parents you need better boundaries with their kids, because they don't have the support and they don't have the skills and they don't have the social reserve, because they're concerned about their finances, they're concerned about their job security, they're concerned about all these other bigger stressors. And let's not make smartphones the kind of only issue, because actually we're then, that becomes the scapegoat and we're not dealing with a lot of the other wider problems.
And the lady in the front here, just in the front.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to what Matthew said about cognitive development, because the question was about human development, and really, really important in human development are also things like self-regulation, emotional resilience, the capacity to socialize with other people, and these things are developed from the moment you start making eye contact with a parent, all being well and being sung to, but also especially through those first 7 years or so. If we don't get that right, they won't have the resilience to cope with anything. I mean, we're seeing so much anxiety now in very young children. So it's starting very, very young. And I think if anyone wants to solve this, you need culture change starting from the beginning.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got to draw things to a close now. Some people have already left. They're going to miss Matthew's story about the big TV aerial. Come up and ask him about that at the end. I think we're all very interested. But genuinely, can I thank you for what has been a very stimulating conversation with our panel, but obviously helped as well with you in the audience and your questions and your comments. So can I thank Greg, Beth, Michael and Matthew for taking the time today to give their views and their opinions. Can I also thank Megan and Chloe, our BSL interpreters, the Parliament staff who've made sure we've run everything smoothly today, and of course thank you to you as well. Being part of the Festival of Politics, there's more to come. We've got sessions, a discussion on Gen Z in politics at 3 o'clock today. There's a discussion on climate optimism at 4:45, and tomorrow the festival has discussions on big issues facing Holyrood 2026, which is our election next year, misinformation and the future of safety of Europe. I think Holyrood 2026 and misinformation, there is a comma in between the two there, but you can make up your own mind if that's needed or not. But thank you for coming along today. Thank you for participating. And this is clearly an issue there is going to be more discussion on, be it in this Parliament, in our classrooms and in society. And I think it's a vital discussion that we all need to take part in, and we will see how it develops in the months and years ahead. So could you please join me in thanking our panel today.